We are now going to go to the fifth conference on Africa from Father Nat Zerachristos. He is sure that he will keep us awake.
Africa, wake up and walk. I took this topic just to honor my color and my African identity. The objective of this brief intervention is nothing else than to introduce the topic and stimulate the reflection afterwards. In fact, our African presence, our Vincentian presence in Africa is not yet very mature, solid, and consistent in Africa. It is coming, but how? Again, let me precise that I am not an expert in the African history. What I will be saying is just for the sake of our common reflection. In this context, I want only to stimulate the reflection and attract your attention. And I hope that after this reflection, some of the provinces who have the possibility to open a mission in Africa, that will be really a very interesting thing to reflect upon. In fact, we Africans are always criticized for our rhythm of life. Many say that we are too late and not punctual, and we lack precision. There is some truth in it, I admit, but sometimes there are also many exaggerations, as you may understand. The very fundamental question is, we need to ask ourselves is Africa the hope of humanity? Is Africa the future continent? If yes, do you think this future is bright or dim? Of course, even in the CM International, I don't think Africa has a good name and fame. It has no good reputation, because it is heavily accused for the lack of moral and financial transparency, lack of accountability, and unfaithfulness, especially with the vow of chastity. I would begin with a very provocative question. Africa is and will be a bomb that will burst briefly, or, I hope, is it a flower waiting to bud? Obviously, the conviction and position of Benedict XVI is that Africa is an enormous spiritual lung for a humanity that appears in crisis of faith and hope. Let me give you some hints of the African continent's suffering today. The actual situation of Africa is very much complex and complicated. Africa and its color represent today poverty, misery, various illnesses, HIV virus, malaria, tuberculosis, wars of various kinds, political and economical instability, corruption, illegal immigration towards the West, looking for freedom and comfort. In short, there is everything and even more. Generally speaking, we speak very little about Africa and Africanness, and many of the times badly. There are some prejudices we need to avoid and correct when we speak about Africa. For example, how many times have heard saying in the train there were a French, an English, and an African, as if Africa were a small country like Switzerland. In fact, Africa is 3 times bigger than Europe. And after Asia, it is the biggest continent in extension and in population. In Africa, we have more than 2,500 languages, spoken languages. And don't forget that this continent embraces all the colors of skin. There are blacks for the large majority, the white, brown, and yellow. Therefore, it deserves respect, love, attention, and sensibility. Africa, black gold. Africa is becoming victim of its own gold and diamond. Unfortunately, the status quo of Africa has some puzzling data. Just to give you an idea. If 13% of the world population lives in Africa, 28% of the worldwide poorest of the poor humanity are in the sub-Saharan Africa. %62% of AIDS patients of the world are in Africa. Unfortunately, in some African countries, even if in these last years, thanks to God, the number is going down, the HIV-infected people reach 40%. 344 million Africans suffer out of malaria, while tuberculosis is unstoppable. Over 260,000 women die every year during birth delivery. Four million African children die before reaching 5 years of age. Unfortunately, in Africa, every day we assist the death of 12,500 children for curable sicknesses. Around 45 million African children do not have the possibility and the opportunity of education. If in the G8 countries, life expectancy is 78, in Africa it is only 46. The annual income of an African is $450 per year. 57 times less than of the G8 countries. 57 times less. After the end of the Cold War, 1989 onward, 9% of the foolish conflicts and nonsense deaths are recorded in Africa, including my country, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, and so on and so on. But this is not the only picture of Africa, as you know. Despite all the difficulties and problems and life hardships, Africans love celebrating life and sowing hope. African soul knows how to smile and how to bring one's own cross, singing and dancing. Where could you find people who smile, sing, and dance even on the graves, if not in Africa? Africans are generous and hospitable and good. Even if we go to the witchcrafts, African soul always looks after the transcendental one. Let me pass to the CM presence in Africa and its role. Oh, sorry. Of course, this is supposed to be the heart of my talk. If the name and fame of Africa is associated with poverty, misery, sicknesses, and so on, as Vincentians, it is time to ask ourselves, what shall we do to change this image of Africa? Again, keep in mind that the Vincentian presence in Africa is not yet very strong. At the moment, we have only 5 provinces, as you see in the PowerPoint. We have 1 vice province and 2 regions and 8 missionary presences. Except for Madagascar and Abyssinia, Ethiopia and Eritrea, Christianity is very young. And respectively, our presence is also very young. Therefore, I can safely say that the Vincentian presence in Africa is still adolescent, and as such, it is tolerable that some teenager sins be there. Am I wrong? What could be done? What can we do as Vincentians to make our presence significant and to bring some changes in this very suffering continent? The key is education. A good and solid human and intellectual formation is the answer. So, we need to make education our target on 2 levels. I am fully aware that we are not going to solve all the educational problems in Africa. However, we can actively participate in its revitalization. In this worthwhile but ambitious project, the well-affirmed and well-known Vincentian universities with united forces or separately could be of great help. DePaul University, St. John's University, Adamson, and others. How and where? Thanks to God, there are some democratic and constitutional countries in Africa. Not all the African countries are in trouble in this sense. So we can choose just one of these democratic and constitutional countries to try to educate Africans. On the other side, inside the CM, as Abba Getahun was telling us yesterday, the COVIAM visitors are willing to start a common delegate somewhere in Africa to grant a good, solid, and Vincentian and African formation. We all can participate in this project if you have some possibilities. Let me conclude. In the past few decades, archaeological research is going on to identify where humanity started. In the last few decades, they discovered that humanity started somewhere in the east of Africa, whether it is in Ethiopia, Eritrea, or Kenya. This means if man is created in the image and similarity of God, our God is black. we need to love him and respect him. Thank you.